Irene Varley walked briskly towards the departure gate. She checked the screen, double-checked her ticket, and let out a quiet sigh of relief. She had made it. There was nearly an hour before takeoff, so she sat down on a nearby bench, not wanting to miss the boarding call. It was her first time on a plane. She had left home hours early, and it had been the right decision. Just getting from the terminal entrance to the right gate had taken her nearly 40 minutes. First, security had been a trial. The scanner kept beeping until she realized she had forgotten to take her front door key out of her shoe, her usual hiding place. But the hardest part was navigating the vast airport itself. She had learned the word gate from the television, though it still felt foreign on her tongue. She hurried through the concourse until a kind airport worker helped her find the right place. People had been pointing in all directions, and at 70 years old, with her modest, slightly worn coat and her hair neatly pinned in a bun, she had found it all deeply confusing. Several travelers looked at her with suspicion, even distaste, clearly taking her for someone homeless or struggling. At last, she calmed down. The plane wasn't going anywhere without her. She sat and watched. Gradually, the departure lounge filled up, but the seats next to her remained empty. People kept their distance. Boarding was announced. Passengers formed a queue. Irene decided to wait and go last. She didn't want to get in anyone's way. First came business class, then the rest. The line moved quickly. Nothing like the waiting room at her local GP surgery, she thought. When almost everyone had boarded, the staff began checking something again. Then they called her name over the tan. Boarding was nearly complete. She hurried to the desk. "Love, why were you waiting?" The gate agent asked in surprise. "You should have boarded with business class." She looked bewildered, but they reassured her and pointed her toward the air bridge. Out of breath, she stepped onto the plane and stopped just inside the door. A flight attendant smiled and showed her to her seat, but no sooner had she sat down than the murmuring began. The man next to her, smartly dressed, mid-50s, looked appalled. He called a flight attendant and insisted there had been a mistake. Other passengers joined in. They didn't want to sit next to someone like her. A young man from the row behind suggested they move to economy if they were so unhappy. They waved him away. A tense argument broke out. Most demanded that the elderly woman be removed from business class. Irene stood in silence. She understood she didn't look like them, but she was clean, quiet, and bothered no one. Still, the atmosphere grew ugly. Eventually, a senior cabin crew member was called, and Irene was gently asked if she would move to economy to avoid any further conflict. A tear ran down her cheek. She reached for her bag, but it slipped from her hands, and her things scattered across the floor. She fumbled to gather them as the other passengers watched. Irritated, one man bent down, picked up a photograph, and handed it to her. An old picture of a child. She pressed it to her chest and said, very quietly, "That's my son. He's the pilot of this plane." The man beside her heard. Then another passenger did. Gradually, the noise died down. Someone near the window said loudly, "She paid for her seat. She has every right to be here." The others fell silent. Irene remained in business class. During the flight, her neighbor, the same man who had complained, asked her about her son, and she told him her story. She had grown up in a small village in Yorkshire. Her father was killed in the war. Her mother raised 4 children alone. As a girl, Irene helped with the younger ones and worked on the farm. For years, she couldn't marry. Her mother was strict and disapproved of every.
When Irene finally fell in love, tragedy struck. Her fiancé died saving her brother from a fire. Soon after, she discovered she was pregnant. She gave birth to a son and raised him alone, bearing the judgment of neighbors and relatives. Later, her mother became seriously ill, confused, sometimes aggressive. To protect her little boy, Irene made the hardest decision of her life. She placed him in a children's home. Not long after, he was adopted, and she lost all contact with him. Years passed. Then, through a friend of a friend, she learned that her son had become a pilot. She never dared to reach out. What right did she have? But she wanted, just once, to see him. She saved her pension for months to afford a business class ticket, as close to the cockpit as she could get. And now, on her birthday, she was flying on the same plane as him. When she finished speaking, the cabin was utterly quiet. Several passengers were wiping their eyes. A little later, the captain's voice came over the intercom. He spoke about life, about people, about how easy it is to judge a stranger. Then he said, Today, there is someone very special on board. My mother, it's her birthday. I want to wish her happiness, and I want to say thank you. And I'm sorry." The passengers rose to their feet and applauded. Irene wept. After landing, they met on the jet bridge. She held her son for the first time in decades. Then she pressed something into his hand, an antique gold cross, worn smooth by time. It had belonged to his grandfather, her own father. And in that moment, Irene Varley was truly happy.